Good morning, welcome to Thoughts and Updates for this week here on a bleak Sunday morning. It looks very overcast here because it's a wonderful morning here in autumn in sunny, not so sunny Scotland, in Kirkintilloch. And I'm now along the way, the trails and tails part of this particular journey, and now I've gone along the road in Kirkintilloch and I am looking at this particular thing here. And the reason I've come here now, in the trail you are sent to a couple of post boxes which are down at the bottom of a street very close to where I live, and the reason I've come here rather than staying there is because of this particular thing here, which is a mural which commemorates where these post boxes were made. Now, who would have thought, and certainly when I was in London a few years back, I saw a sculpture where all these iconic phone boxes were put together in order to commemorate the fact that they had been such an iconic part of the British landscape. Who would have thought that something that's associated with Englishness almost as much as red post boxes or the red double-decker buses in London would actually come from here. The Line Foundry was where they made cast iron telephone boxes, and they got this particular style of telephone box, the K8 it was called, in 1966, just a year after I was born, and they continued to make it right up until the factory closed down in 1984. Now, the problem with the factory was that instead of diversifying, what they ended up doing was that they ended up spending far too much time on one product, leading to being over-reliant, so that when there was a downturn in the demand for it, because it's a very sturdy piece of equipment and therefore wasn't necessarily going to be required to be replaced very often, they had nothing to replace it. Now, the Line Foundry in Kirkintilloch is along the way a bit, or was, it's no longer there. Of course, it's nearly 40 years since it closed down. It'll soon be 40 years in a couple of years' time, at the anniversary of that closure. And the 1980s was a period of time where industrialisation within the whole of Scotland started to alter and change. We lost the shipyards, or they reduced in some form. The miners were about to go on strike in order to remain open and lost that strike, leading to a lot of pit closures all over Fife and Ayrshire in particular, all over the United Kingdom. So having a factory closed down in the 1980s was hardly unusual. In fact, you could almost go so far as to say it was quite normal. What replaced it was a demand for some kind of regeneration, but it led to a lot of mass unemployment. Huge numbers who were out of work, unable to use the skills that they had managed to accrue from being out in the industry shop floor, that were no longer required or needed. We didn't invest in heavy industry in the 1980s. We didn't invest in industry. We brought parks, industrial parks, places with small industrial units, hoping that, in the words of one of the characters in The Ship in 1990, that people who used to rivet ships were going to now stitch knickers. Wasn't successful, so it led to a downturn in the way in which we saw our economy, and the resurgence was of a service economy. We were now going to service the rest of the world. In fact, as part of Europe, we were probably the country that was most likely to provide you with the type of services, financial and otherwise, the soft services that were going to be more required for the 20th and beginning of the 21st century, or so we thought. Until we've discovered that actually manufacturing, farming, all of the heavy industry, heavy workload based, is something that we needed to hold on to. Germany did. Germany have come back with their investment from the state having paid dividends, whereas ours were reliant upon other people. When it came to steel, Poland, I think, is one of our major contributors, and you will notice they're European. We have come out of the European Union believing that we are going to be a better place to negotiate with the rest of the world, indeed to stand on our own 2 feet. And yet we have found already that's not particularly the case. So as I stand in the shadow of some form of edifice which represents the ultimate in Britishness, the ultimate in a sense in Englishness, provided by the Scots, on a trail looking at our heritage, looking at our past, in the context of a small town, the northeast corner of Glasgow, the shadow of decisions made fall wide and far. We have regenerated and we have come back. But I suppose for me right now, the issue is going to be one of, as we come out of the pandemic, as I've said many times before, this is something which we have to address. We have to find out what it is that we want this community of ours to look like. And the news of the last couple of days of a Member of Parliament being in their surgery, stabbed to death by somebody who believed that violence was the way forward, is not a community, not a society of which I would necessarily want any part. I want us to be in a position where people with different points of view, different ways of thinking, can be enriched by being part of a democratic process, challenged by those, rightly, who have an alternative point of view, but not violent. How are we going to achieve that? That, to me, as we come out of this pandemic, is one of the most challenging things of all. It's not just how we're going to recover economically. How are we going to recover emotionally? How are we going to stop those who are violent and angry from taking it out on those with whom they disagree? So, for those new American subscribers, hello, welcome, thank you for subscribing. There's a button somewhere to click on in order to subscribe if you wish to ask others. This is my weekly update and my weekly wander and meander through where I live until I come out the other end and go to another trail and find somewhere else in order to take the heritage and the history. But the reason for doing this is something I heard a long time ago, and that was, those who forget the lessons of history are condemned to repeat them. So till next time, bye for now.